Hello, Henrik Lagerlund. Thank you for coming. You're professor of history of philosophy at the University of Stockholm, and today we want to talk about medieval skepticism. Yeah, and I'd just like to start right away with the first question. What do you define as medieval skepticism, and how does it differ to ancient and modern skepticism?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's been traditional, I think, to think of skepticism as sort of being defined by the ancient kind of skepticism. And you have to look at skepticism, I think, a little broader than that to see how skepticism sort of becomes important in the Middle Ages. Of course, you have all throughout the Middle Ages, you have skepticism of the academic kind. Because they knew Cicero, and Cicero wrote this book on the academic skeptics. He was himself a skeptic. And the other kind, the Sextus or the Pyrrhonian kind of skepticism, was not so much discussed in the Middle Ages. In really neither of the medieval traditions, like the Latin, the Arabic, or the Greek. But between that, there's not only these two kinds of skepticism in the Middle Ages, there's other kinds of discussions of skepticism. Skepticism about knowledge, skepticism about religious thinking sort of is available too. And of course, new kinds of arguments pop up at this time. For example, in the Latin tradition, you have this new arguments that comes from a discussion of God's omnipotence. And if God is so omnipotent, maybe he's deceiving us. And what if God is a deceiver? Then can we know anything if that's true? So, but the mere possibility, of course, for that argument, the mere possibility that that's the case is enough to generate the skepticism. So, and that had a profound influence on philosophy in the 14th century.
Yeah, so what sources did skepticism in medieval Arabian and Islamic philosophy have?
That's, again, a very good question, because it's one answer is none.
Okay.
Because the ones we have today, the Cicero's and the main ones are Cicero and Sextus, and they were not translated to Arabic. So in one way, you can say there was no knowledge of ancient skepticism in the Arabic tradition. But on the other hand, you had something very interesting in the beginning of the Islamic sort of forming of the Islamic religion. You had a lot of different views and discussions at that time about the new religion. What was it? What could one know about God? What sort of... So there was an enormous amount, and there was different kinds of views being promoted that sort of from a sort of distance looks kind of, oh, what's right? I mean, who is right in all this? So it sort of promotes this kind of sort of skeptical attitude toward in the discussion, in the sort of Islamic religious discussions. There was sort of an atmosphere in the early sort of Islamic tradition for a skepticism and for anti-skepticism to evolve within a sort of more philosophical framework. Yeah.
Yeah, in your book, Skepticism in Philosophy, a comprehensive historical introduction, you wrote specifically about, I think I need your help. Is it Ghazâli?
Ghazâli, yeah. Or Ghazâli.
Ghazâli.
You do the sort of, you have the emphasis deep down in your throat, sort of Ghazâli.
Okay.
But Ghazâli is what sort of, we sort of Europeans who don't know quite how to speak Arabic say.
So who was he, and how does his process of skepticism begin?
He was a lawyer in the beginning. He came from Tus, which is in present-day Iran. But he educated himself to become a lawyer, and he wrote a lot and became quite famous. So he was invited to this very important school in Baghdad, where he's as a teacher, and became sort of the the intellectual of the time. He was this sort of the person that became quite famous in Baghdad, and was a well-known figure. He wrote as much as 70 different works. And during this time, he has this sort of skeptical crisis, which is referred to, and he writes his autobiography, which is sort of his philosophical autobiography, and it's not to be taken literally. I mean, it's not really true in the sense that it's about his life. I mean, but it sort of portrays this sort of this searching or this meditation, this search for knowledge and foundation for his philosophical or religious thinking. It's an interesting search because it's very much sort of the search of a skeptic, someone who doesn't trust his senses, doesn't trust tradition, doesn't trust the philosophers and so things. So it's really searching, in a very, very similar to how Descartes presents his search in his meditations. Of course, this is much earlier than Descartes, but it's very much in the same kind of fashion. It's a genuine search for knowledge. The end of the search is a little bit different, of course, than Descartes, but still, it's a very much a search and.
So can you portray his main argument for skepticism?
Well, I mean, I think it's actually wrong to say that he's a skeptic. I don't think he's a skeptic in the end. I mean, he uses skepticism.
Okay.
Again, in similar to Descartes, skepticism is used sort of in this search for knowledge. But skepticism is not an end in itself. It's more sort of a tool to find some firm knowledge or some firm ground for knowledge or faith. So what he does in this refutation of the philosophers is systematically go through sort of the philosophers' arguments, as he calls them. And the philosophers he have in mind here is foremost, of course, Avicenna, because he says that the philosopher thinks that demonstration or proof is more important than faith. So what you have here when you look at this debate that's going on between the philosophers, or foremost Avicenna and Ghazâli, is this famous sort of debate between reason and faith. I mean, similar to what the Western tradition has much later, in the 18th century with the Enlightenment, the sort of debate between faith and reason that goes on there. The interesting thing is that in the Arabic tradition, sort of faith wins over reason, but in the Western sort of European Enlightenment tradition, reason wins over faith, which of course has enormous consequences for the development of Europe as opposed the sort of Arabic Islamic world. But anyway, he attacks this and argues then uses skepticism against several of these arguments that the philosophers have outlined. One of the most famous one is discussion 19 about causality, and also what comes out in that discussion is Ghazali's occasionalism, that he's really sort of an occasionalist, meaning that he thinks that God is really the cause of everything in the world. So any cause and effect that happens in the world is actually God acting on the world. There's no real connection between sort of things in the world, and anything that happens is due to God's will, for example.
When we think about skepticism today, what questions should we ask ourselves? And do you think that the same initial questions are relevant as at the time of Ghazâli?
Ghazâli, yeah.
Ghazâli.
Well, I do think. I mean, I think this genuine search is very honest. I mean, for him. I mean, I obviously would end up in a different position because I don't have his sort of belief in God, but I think that this searching and which is also an aspect, the classical aspect, of course, of Pyrrhonian skepticism, that skepticism is ultimately about a search for knowledge, a search for something, a search for certainty. So I think that's something, certainly an aspect that I think is important today. I mean, today we're faced with so much sort of falsity and information through social media and everything, and we have this AI problem now. Anything can be falsified. So it's very hard to know what's truth or not. You have to almost always investigate before you make judgment. Make sure that everything. So there, I think skepticism is a necessary tool for us to navigate the world today. So that's important. But of course, you have to also think that even though skepticism is essential, too much skepticism is a problem, because then you end up missing a lot of things that are actually true and are actually can actually be known. So that's a problem. So you have to find a way to sort of balance skepticism.